For now, our next talk is going to come from Natalia Ciecierska-Holmes. Her title is Raw Meat and Vegetarian Dilemmas, Multi-Species Feeding Relations Between Dogs and Humans in Australia and the UK. And this paper includes a trigger warning that we will see images of animals as food, the dead bodies of animals. And so I ask you to please welcome Natalia.
Hi, thanks so much, Tom, for the introduction, and yeah, the content warning as well, which I think is really important. And just to give you a bit of background of sort of where I'm at, I'm going into my final year of my PhD, so trying to sort of like analyze a lot of data, and really would really welcome feedback and comments to try and develop this further. Let's see, hopefully I can change the slides. So to start off with, I would like to acknowledge the Ghana people, who are the original custodians of the Adelaide Plains and the land on which the University of Adelaide's campuses at North Terrace, Waite and Roseworthy are built. And just to give you a quick overview, my presentation will be split into two parts. So I'll start with a bit of background and context, and then the second part will be to introduce some sort of tentative themes from the UK fieldwork, and I've also done fieldwork that I've just finished in Australia, but I'm not quite ready to present that yet, as I'm still working through the data. And really, just to start, I think I'll give you an anecdote. So several years ago, while I was completing my master's in social science in Berlin, in Germany, I went to my friend Iga's house for dinner. And while we were cooking, she said that she had to feed her dog Helmut. So what she did next really surprised me. She went to the fridge and she got some fresh, raw meat or animal parts. And as a vegan food researcher, I watched with a mix of sort of curiosity and discomfort as Helmut devoured his dinner. And then what shocked me more is that my friend Iga herself is vegetarian. So I asked Iga why someone who has chosen not to eat animals would feed them to their dog. And she looked at me quite sincerely then and said, Helmut is a wolf. So Iga is part of a growing number of vegetarians and vegans who are choosing to feed their dogs a raw meat-based diet. And these have become increasingly popular since the 1990s. Although they vary, these diets often include raw or uncooked meat ingredients from farmed or wild animals and can be both commercial and homemade. And this encounter made me realize two things. Firstly, that what people feed their dogs and what they eat themselves is entangled. And second, that what people feed their dogs is about more than food. It can also tell us a lot about human-animal relations. So, as I embarked on my PhD project, I wanted to better understand the relationship between what people feed their dogs and what they eat themselves, and in particular, these shifting dietary practices. And what I found in consumer and animal science literature on pet feeding are two dominant narratives. And these are humanization and commercialization. So, in this literature, the humanization of dog food is framed as dog food trends mirroring trends in human nutrition. So, studies have indicated that owners who purchase organic food for themselves are more likely to purchase premium pet food, and dogs who are fed plant-based diets are exclusively fed by vegan and vegetarian owners. And on the other hand, pet food corporations stand to benefit from these humanization dynamics, as the development of sort of vast numbers of new products is driving growth and further commercialization of the pet food industry. So, with all of this in mind, I still had several questions. So, while the humanization of dog diets could be said to result in higher quality and healthier food, this humanization commercialization cycle seemed simplistic. And I wondered whether it was foreclosing other kinds of relations that might emerge when feeding dogs. So, going back to my story about Iga and Helmut, these framings didn't really account for why vegans and vegetarians would choose to feed their dog a raw meat-based diet. I then went into the human-animal relations literature to try and explore what uh, alternative feeding relations that acknowledge difference might look like. So drawing on feminist scholars such as Val Plumwood's work, so she highlighted that developing respect for non-human others requires acknowledging their distinctness and difference, and not trying to reduce or assimilate them to the human sphere. Similarly, sociologist Rebecca Fox emphasized the recognition of the inherent value of companion animals, not based on their similarity to humans, but also acknowledging aspects of difference. And in empirical research, so these different perspectives have emphasized the biological and natural behaviors of non-human others. So examples include David Bluin's US-based empirical study with dog owners that revealed what he calls a protectionistic orientation. So this characterizes animals as part of nature or having inherent interests and rights. And I think really importantly, in this way, animals are constructed as subjects, but not as people. And then another article I found really interesting was by Rebecca Fox and Nancy Gee, where they indicated that there is a form of alternative companionship that's emerging. And so in addition to perceptions of animals as natural, this is also characterized by resistances to mainstream discourses. So sort of taking all this forward, and in order to better understand alternative feeding relations, my PhD project explores the relationship between dogs who are fed a raw meat-based diet and humans who are fed, who follow a plant-based diet, sorry. So this isn't representative of all dog owners or even all raw feeders, but I really wanted to explore how these divergent dietary practices could shed light on other kinds of relations that could emerge through feeding. And so I use the term plant-based diet to describe the diet of someone who's gone through a reflexive period, resulting in them reducing or fully cutting out the consumption of animal products. So initially, I recruited self-identifying vegans and vegetarian human participants. But I then broadened this as I realized quite quickly that several respondents were at different stages of their journey away from animal-based foods. And something else that was really interesting is that several people weren't sure whether they should identify as vegan or vegetarian because they fed their dogs a meat-based diet. And so I then employed more than talk methods, and this consisted of both sort of more traditional semi-structured interviews, which with photo and video food diaries that included both dog food and human food. So drawing on multi-species research methods, the food diaries sort of aim to visualize both dogs and food animals in the research process and foreground human-animal relations. But the following themes that I'll present to you now remain largely from a human perspective. So yeah, the next part of my presentation will have some themes or tentative themes from the UK data, which I collected in late 2022. And yeah, as I've just finished data collection with the Australian participants, this is sort of emergent and will continue to change as the analysis progresses. So I really resonate with what you said, Leslie, about where you sort of stop with the analysis, and maybe we can discuss that afterwards. So the first theme then is species appropriate diets. And one way in which difference was often invoked in the discussions I had with dog owners was through this idea of what constitutes a species appropriate diet. So UK participants often emphasize that dogs and humans are different species and therefore have species specific needs concerning the food that they eat. A raw meat-based diet was seen as a natural diet for dogs due to their ancestry with wolves and food chain taxonomy as carnivores. So the anecdote I described with Eager and Helmut at the beginning, where she said that Helmut was a wolf, was not a one-off occurrence in my research. And raw feeding, interestingly, was also described as an ancestral diet, which sort of connected dogs temporally to the past and spatially to these connotations of a wild, pre-domesticated dog, as indicated by Henry in the quote here, where he said, I suppose you could turn around and say that, dogs in the wild, they're descended from wolves. I suppose what would their diet have been? Well, it would have been, it's meat. They're basically carnivores, aren't they? That's my interpretation anyway. And so these perceptions were often rooted in sort of ideas around dogs' physiology that distinguish them from omnivorous humans. And interestingly, it wasn't seen as appropriate to feed dogs a vegetarian or vegan diet. And so this statement by Lisa, where she said, "My own diet is obviously vegetarian, but it's not a suitable diet for my dog." I don't think that's right because they are carnivores and we are omnivores. So for us to eat vegetarian food, that's fine. But their digestive system is designed for meat. So, sort of contrary to these humanization narratives, it was interesting to see how many participants really emphasized this species difference. And then for the second theme, this situates dog feeding then on a backdrop of natural dog feeding behavior and environments that distinguish them from the way that humans eat. So this really came through in particular in the feeding diaries, where participants shared numerous examples of feeding enrichment, such as lick mats, snuffle mats, and feeding toys, such as the pictures that you can see here. And the aim of this was really to slow down the dog's eating speed, but also emulate foraging behavior that they would have expressed in the wild. And some participants didn't use any kind of bowl or mat at all, preferring to feed their dogs straight from the ground outside. Such as Paula, who said, it's much better to feed them in as close to their natural environment where, they would actually pick up a bit of soil and a bit of stuff while they're eating. It's all part of the digestion and to eat on mud or soil. So I was quite happy with that bit. I was like, yay, we can feed her outside. It's better outside. And so I found that these distinctions then really were sort of drawn between dogs and humans, and they justify not just feeding different food, but the different ways of eating that were sort of shaped by perceptions of dogs' needs and desires. Another theme then was what's best for the dog. And this was really interesting when looking at human values, especially around vegan and vegetarian diets and plant-based eating more generally. So all of the human participants that I interviewed held various cultural and religious values regarding farmed animal welfare, environmental sustainability and health that led them to follow a plant-based diet. And their deep concern and respect for other animals in particular led to dilemmas and conflicts. And they often expressed that in choosing to feed their dogs a raw meat-based diet, they put the needs of their dogs above their own values. So during these discussions, participants often appealed to the language of what's best for the dog. And one of the most thought-provoking examples of this was expressed by Nikhil, who is a vegetarian Hindu and doesn't eat beef for religious reasons. And I was surprised to hear that he feeds his dog Flora beef, stating, "My wife and I have been in the same train of thought about doing what's best for her because she's our baby. And if that conflicts with what I do for myself, then so be it." So, most Hindus don't eat beef, but will feed Flora beef because she likes it. It's one of her favorite things to eat. And many participants also claim to be attentive to their dog's needs, such as James, who stated, "The dogs were communicating to me like, we want this, we need this. This is like what we've been waiting for all morning." And then you don't have that ethical dilemma because it's very straightforward. It's like, this is what my dog needs. My dog is telling me he needs it, and so I'm preparing it and I'm going to give it to him. And this was actually something that surprised me. So I thought that people would really experience these conflicts. I thought that it would be harder for them to deal with, but it actually was quite surprising that they navigated them using this discourse of doing what's best for the dog. And then the final theme I'll present today is the critiques that came through from my participants of the pet food industry. So while positioning themselves as having their dog's best interests in mind, many people express concerns around the commodification of dog food within both the pet food and veterinary industries, neither of which were seen as doing what's best for their dogs. So this was expressed by Lisa, who said, "I'm a little bit critical quietly about there are things like Hill's Science Diet and Royal Canin that the vets will recommend because I know that they get a markup on selling it. I also know from my time at the Royal Veterinary College that a student vet gets 1 day on nutrition. They get 1 day's lecture on nutrition, and it's normally sponsored by Hills or Canon. So they're going to get a very biased viewpoint. And people were especially critical of the quality of commercial dog food, which was often compared to junk food or convenience food. So Henry said, so, the way I look at food, the way I look at it nowadays for dogs, even, is, a lot of pedigree chum and things like that. That's the equivalent of giving your dogs fast food, processed food. So by feeding what they perceived as like a natural, unprocessed, raw diet, participants sought to protect their dogs from commercialization, which was entangled with low quality ingredients and the profit-driven motives of the commercial pet food industry. Yeah. So to conclude then, this paper really aims to contribute to discussions of human companion animal relations. And with the prevalence of these humanization and commercialization narratives in pet feeding literature, I argue that it's really important to acknowledge the existence of other kinds of relations. And this is what I seek to explore in my project through an empirical analysis of the relationship between plant-based dog owners and raw-fed dogs. And the tentative themes from the fieldwork show that while dogs were recognized as part of the family, they had their own species-specific needs and behaviors. And humans who followed a plant-based diet often place their dog's need above their own values in an effort to do what's best for their dog. And then thirdly, human participants really sort of critiqued the interests of the pet food and veterinary industries as holders of expertise, and instead positioned themselves as more attentive to their dog's needs. So in this way, like many of my human participants emphasize their dog's difference to humans, thereby challenging dominant humanization and commercialization narratives. And despite often acknowledging the domestication of dogs to some extent, they place quite strong boundaries around the extent to which they saw their dogs as human. So yeah, that's really where I've got to so far. I'm really excited to hear any sort of questions or comments you might have, or connect with me by email, and I'm happy to continue the discussions later on. Yeah, thanks so much.